That was a fantastic update. Thank you very much. So moving on to our next speaker. It's titled Leading from the Inside Out, the Power of Physical and Mental Wellbeing in Leadership. Peter Gutwein is a former Premier and also Treasurer of Tasmania, who's now advising some of the world's most progressive companies tackling climate change and clean energy transition. From leaving school at 15, overcoming a speech impediment and battling a fear of public speaking, Peter's story is one of sheer determination, humility and also purpose. As Premier, he led with compassion and conviction, putting the well-being of Tasmanians at the heart of every decision. He turned Tasmania from the nation's worst performing economy into its best. He protected our state during the COVID-19 pandemic with swift independent action and championed a bold renewable energy future with one of the world's leading net zero targets. He also delivered on long-held dreams. Tasmania getting its own AFL team. It's a bit happening, isn't there? Reviving its NBL presence after 21 years, and how incredible has that been with our Jack Jumpers, particularly here playing at MyState Bank Arena. Post-politics, Peter now works with companies like Sea Forest, Incat and Countrywide Hydrogen to drive global sustainability. He's also a black belt in Taekwondo. He's a marathon runner, and he's recently become one of the fittest 59-year-olds in Australia, proving that peak performance in life and leadership starts with balance and also with well-being. His story resonates because it's real. It's authentic, it's funny, moving and full of hard-earned insight. As I mentioned, presentation day is Leading from the Inside Out, the Power of Physical and Mental Wellbeing in Leadership. Would you please welcome the Honourable Peter Gutwein.
Well, thank you very much, Rick, for that kind introduction. AFL team, almost. 59, not quite 60 at the moment. But look, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my very great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning. Could I first of all just say thank you to WorkSafe. When I was Premier, WorkSafe did a ton of work in helping to keep Tasmanians safe through one of its most difficult periods. It's certainly something that I haven't forgotten and am very thankful for, and I think the rest of Tasmania should be as well. So thank you to WorkSafe Tasmania for your efforts. Could I start just for, you've heard a brief introduction. Yes, I'm the former Premier. I like to think I was the good Premier, but there is a bit going on in that space at the moment. I'm a board chair, a director of some companies, strategic advisor, and look, and I wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but importantly, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, and I'm someone's son as well. And in providing my CV over the last 20 years, prior to getting out of politics, I would not have mentioned that, but it is in fact the most important thing to mention. Now, I want to take you on a journey today. I want to start with where I left and just take you into my confidence. On the day that I left, I said what was absolutely true, but I didn't say everything when I left. And in life, there are times when you just know that it's right, and I want to just walk you up to that decision. I was absolutely cooked. There's no two ways about that. I was physically and mentally tired. But I loved the job, and we had gone through a very difficult period. We'd just opened up, which was one of the most difficult periods, and we'd moved through COVID. And Tasmania, I think, across the world, was seen as being one of the safest places on the planet. As I say, thanks to organisations like WorkSafe, thanks to Tasmanians for just digging in and getting the job done. But things changed. And in March of 2022, for the first time, we had COVID in our household. One of my children got COVID. Now, my working week up to that point was generally leave Launceston on a Sunday, travel to Hobart, work in Hobart through the course of the week, travel home if I was lucky on a Friday, sometimes a Saturday, spend Saturday night with my family, and then on a Sunday afternoon I would head back to Hobart again. Well, I'd done that this week. We'd had breakfast that morning with the family. I jumped in the car about lunchtime, arrived back in Hobart, got a phone call, one of my kids had tested positive. I spoke to Dr. Veach, who is one of the driest but nicest individuals that you'd ever come across. And Veach said, look, 4 hours contact with your family, or 4 hours window that you were in contact with your family when someone's positive, you've got to go home. So I rang my wife on the way up the highway and I said, look, darling, I'm coming home. I'm going to be with you for 7 days. And she said, gee, I hope we survive. But we did. But what was really interesting, on the 5th day, Amanda that morning at breakfast, we had one child upstairs, Crook, the other one sitting having breakfast with us. She said, we're going to have a bottle of champagne tonight. And I said, why is that? She said, well, we've got something to celebrate. For the first time in 2 years, you've spent 5 consecutive nights under this roof with us as a family. And she said, that's something that we should celebrate. Now, I started to think about that during the course of the day. And I realised that my life was wildly out of balance. It was in a complete imbalance. And so over the last couple of days that we were in isolation, we started to chat about what the future might look like. And I made up my mind. I'm very good at making decisions and making them quickly. And I made up my mind that I was done. I had 2 kids under the age of 18 that I hardly knew. I had a wife that I'd grown distant from. And it was my chance to catch the last couple of years with my kids before they became adults and went off into the world. And so as a family, we decided that I would leave. I went back to Hobart after we came out of isolation on the Wednesday the following week. And I explained to my office that I was going. And they were very persuasive. In fact, my Chief of Staff, Andrew Finch, if any of you know, very, very decent fellow and one of the most persuasive individuals I've ever come across, by Friday had changed my mind. He said, you've got some key things that you need to do. There was climate change legislation that we'd been working on for a period of time. Budget to come down in about 8 weeks from that point, and the small matter of an AFL football team. And so on the Saturday when I got home that week, I explained to my wife that I'd be staying. But what we would do is change my office arrangements, that I'd do more out of Launceston, get some balance back into my life, and we'd have people travel to see me rather than me spending all of my time in Hobart. Now on the Sunday morning, very next day, I had to meet the Prime Minister. And we were signing off on the Mariners Link, the first stage on that. It was to be a press conference on the northwest coast. And so I got up early, 7:15, I was in my office, and I was working on the speech. And my wife rang. She said, you've got to get home. One of the kids has collapsed. They're unconscious. The ambulance is on its way. I don't know what's happening. And so I got home, have the ambulance had arrived, and they were bundling my child into the ambulance. My wife jumped in with them and we headed off to the LGH. Get to the LGH and I give them their due. The security guard said, look, I'm sorry, Premier, your rules, 1 parent in or 1 visitor, you're on the curb. So I went and sat in the car and on the phone talking to my wife, and our child started to come out of it. And over the next hour, things started to improve. And I decided that in discussion with Mandy that I would head up the coast and go and do this announcement with the Prime Minister. I rang, it was Morrison at the time, rang Morrison and said, look, I'll be up, no politicking, sign the agreement, I'm gone, I've got a sick child. Now, we did that, and if anybody's ever watched a political press conference, you'll know you get 5 to 10 minutes where you can talk about the things that you want. Then after that, things change. And questions of the day start. And they can be anything. Anything can come through the gate at you. Now, fortunately, this day, there were no difficult questions for the Premier of Tasmania. My mind was elsewhere, thank goodness. But there were a lot for the Prime Minister, and I'm standing off his shoulder. And the first question was, Gladys Berejiklian has just released a text saying that you're a liar. How do you respond to that Prime Minister? The next question was, other ministers have released texts that say that you're a bully. How do you respond to that Prime Minister? And I'm standing there in this press conference, Prime Minister just here. And I thought, what am I doing here? A week ago, I was going to leave politics, spend time with my family. The very first weekend, I've got a kid in hospital. I don't know how they're doing. And I'm standing here listening to this bullshit. So I made my mind up on the spot. Press conference finished. I shook the Prime Minister's hand, said, I'll give you a call tonight, climbed in the car, rang Mandy and said, tomorrow, that's it, I'm done. And so endeth the premiership of the 46th Premier. Now, when I look back, I was very fortunate, very lucky to get to that position. And I wanted to share a little bit about my journey with you. I'm a migrant. Came to this country when I was 4 years old. My father was a refugee post the Second World War. He was then a migrant in the mid-1950s as a teenager, moved to England with his parents. He was an Austrian Yugoslav. My mother was from northern England, Lancashire. The picture behind me is myself on the left, my elder sister by 10 and a half months, Amanda, in the middle, my younger brother on the far side by 10 and a half months, Daniel. As you can tell, the Gutwein household back then didn't have a television. Now, we came to this country and we arrived here in 1969, about 25 years after the Second World War, and Tasmania was a different place. Anyone with a Germanic-sounding surname, anyone with a Germanic-sounding accent was treated with suspicion, and things were pretty tough. Today, our circumstances would have been described as socio-economically challenged. Back then, we were just poor. We bore the brunt of the teasing and the bullying in the playgrounds as kids growing up. But I had another challenge that I had to overcome. I was born with a speech impediment. It happens to about 4% of kids. My tongue was stuck to the floor of my mouth. Now, for a lot of kids, if it's only a mild case, there's a quick snip just after birth. Back then, if it was moderate to severe, they'd wait until you were 7 or 8 years of age before they would put you under anaesthesia and they would operate and release the tongue. So I went through all of my early formative years unable to speak properly. A Germanic accent, or a cross between a Germanic and Lancashire brogue accent, and my tongue stuck to the bottom of my mouth, and I sounded like that. I had the most intense fear of speaking in public. As a child, I withdrew. It was something that became a real phobia. And when I say speaking in public, speaking to one person was okay, just. Speaking to 2 or more was speaking in public, and I had a real difficulty. Now, this manifested itself, as I've said, in a phobia, into a phobia of public speaking, of actually opening my mouth in public. And all of you will have been through a grade 6 end of school leaving ceremony. Now, the little school that I attended was Myrtle Park Primary School. It's no longer there, closed in the mid-1990s. But we had a hall that was attached to it, one of the post-Second World War hall projects that were built as a commemoration hall. And in this little hall, we used to hold our grade 6 presentation. And in that grade 6 presentation, the culture of, and practice of the school was that, as is with many schools, that the leaving class would stand on stage and sing a song or recite a poem, and then they would receive their awards. Well, I started at the beginning of grade 6, completely terrified of what was going to happen at the end of grade 6. I withdrew as a child. I had eating difficulties, began bedwetting. It was a real issue for me. When I look back and I talk to my mother, my father's passed some time ago, about that. They were, as parents, just could not work it out what was wrong with me. I'd had my tongue fixed at 7 years of age. I'd had a couple of years of speech therapy, so I could speak reasonably well, albeit back then an American speech therapist was the one that was employed to assist me, and so Lancashire brogue, Germanic accent, and then the American speechy, like, you know, God help me. Even today, I get vitamin and vitamin, tomato, mucked up, much to the amusement of my kids. But it was decided in this conversation with my principal that I would get onto the stage. But they came up with a compromise, because there was no way in the world I was going to stand at the front of the stage and open my mouth and sing to a group of people that I did not know. At the back of the stage, and you can all picture these small country halls, they usually have the honour boards up on the wall. Back of this stage was a piano. And what was agreed between my parents and the principal was that this piano would be wedged out from the wall to create a small gap, and behind it a stool was sat. And as the grade 6 class got onto the stage, I was allowed to veer off and sit on the stool. And for that song, I played the triangle. Now, when I look back, and as a parent today, it almost brings me to tears thinking about those circumstances. But it was the very first step that I took to actually overcoming this issue of public speaking. It was the first step on the journey. Now, my communication or lack of communication skills dogged me. As Rick mentioned, I left school at 15. I left home at 16. I left Tasmania at 20 to try and find myself. During my 20s, I decided that I had to do something about this phobia. It was absolutely crippling me. And so I decided that what I had to do was to train my thoughts to support myself. And if you think about this, if you believe that what you think has an impact on your life, if you believe that what you think impacts on your relationships, impacts on your health, impacts on the way that you go about your profession, then it's important to manage and train your thoughts to support you and to enable you rather than to work against you. And so up there's me being sworn in as Premier back in January of 2020. If a poll had been held 40 years ago as to who was the least likely person to ever be in that position, without doubt I would have won it. And in my 20s, decided that I had to change the way that I went about things. And what occurred was this. I went to a seminar back in the late 1980s. I was working in Perth. I was in the finance and insurance industry. And I was looking for anything that would support me. And I went and heard an American motivational speaker speak. A guy called Lou Ties. He stood on stage, fellow be a little bit smaller than me, and he was talking about the importance of managing your thoughts. And he looked out across the audience and he said, there's not much of me. And he said, as I look out across this room, he said, I'm certain that most of you could best me physically. But he said, not one of you can best me mentally. He said, because for the last decade, I've been affirming to myself every day, over and over, that I'm mentally tough and nothing can harm me. Now, I heard that and I thought, that's interesting, because the voice in my head's telling me all sorts of different things about how useless I am, how I should feel embarrassed, the shame that I feel for not being able to speak. And that struck a chord with me. The second thing he did that night, though, was what galvanised me into action. He said, I'm going to invite somebody up on stage to help me with my presentation. You can imagine, I've just gone into a white-knuckle fear, thinking, geez, I hope it's not me. And he said, under someone's seat, I put a sticky note. And if you'd reach under your seat, if you've got that sticky note, hold it up and then get up here on stage and away we go. Now, I sat there in absolute abject fear. Sweat started to run down my face. I could feel it trickling down my back. I could not, for the life of me, reach under the seat. Now, fortunately, some other lucky person had the note. But I left that presentation shortly after because I had made a decision that I needed to get on top of this, that I needed to take steps to ensure that I could manage this. And I went away and I wrote a plan. I mean, as I'm sure most of you have at some stage in your life been introduced to goal setting. I wrote a goal to actually become a better public speaker. Part of that was to join a Toastmasters class, part of that was to practice, but the other part of it was to support myself with affirmations. And so I started about 30 years ago with a very simple affirmation in terms of public speaking. And you'll be the judge of it today, but that affirmation which I've carried with me and I repeat every day is this: that I'm a charismatic and brilliant public speaker who loves speaking in public, at conferences, events, on the radio and on the television. And that underpins the thinking that I have in terms of my ability as a public speaker. Now, I also use affirmations in other areas of my life. So I think it's really important that we manage what we think. I left school at 15. I didn't finish my education. I went on later in life to get qualifications from university. But when I was a young man, I didn't think that I brought much to the table. I was a migrant. We'd been poor. I couldn't speak. I had this fear of public speaking. I had no education. They were the thoughts that were going through my mind. And so I needed to find an affirmation to build myself up. And so again, I set a goal, and that was about getting an education. It was about improving myself. But importantly, it was supported by an affirmation. And that affirmation was a very simple one. And I say this to myself every single day: I can do anything that I set my mind to. I can do anything that I set my mind to. When I lean into that, I firmly and honestly believe there is absolutely nothing that I couldn't do if I set my mind to it. Now, affirmations have supported me. Now, I'd encourage you to think about goal setting. I'd encourage you to think about using positive language in terms of the way that your thoughts are being structured in your own head. It can support you, it can help you. Now, when I stood down from politics, and I'd had 20 years of public life, I was about 15 kilos heavier than what I am today. I wasn't in the greatest shape. You know, Rick mentioned that, yes, I'm black belt in Taekwondo, I've run marathons, but used to do things sort of as projects. Set myself something over a 12-month period, get stuck into it, and then I'd fall back again and set myself a project. When I stood down, I decided that I wanted to set a real foundation. I was 57. 2/3 of my life was over. But what I wanted was to ensure that the last third of my life was the best third of my life. Now, in stepping out of politics, and I just want to make this point, I have the same challenges that all of you have in terms of needing to go to work and to earn an income. Myself, Hodgman, Rockcliffe, we were the class of 2002. We came into politics knowing that when we left, there was no parliamentary pension, there was no golden parachute. We were just superannuated the same as everybody else. And when I left the Premier's office, I walked out with a little cardboard box with my belongings in it and nothing else. And so I needed to find work. I needed to ensure that I could provide for my family. And so, taking all of that into account, I decided the best thing that I could possibly do, though, was to ensure that my own well-being was as good as it possibly could be, so that I could support my family as good as I possibly could. And so I decided to set a foundation. And in setting that foundation, I focused on the three big levers: eat, sleep, and move. And I'd always had challenges with my diet for a long period of time. My weight had gone up from football playing weight of about 80 kilos to 105 at one stage, down to a low 90s, sat around 88. I stand today at about 75. When I left politics, I was just under 90 kilos, and I decided, well, what I want to do is to get myself into the best shape that I can. I know that I'm not, but I will. And so I didn't go on a diet, but I changed my diet. In fact, I eat more and healthier today than what I ever have done. And all I did was simply twitch up the protein and twitch down the carbohydrates. And I found that without eating less, just changing the mix, that the weight started to fall off me. I built in some movement, an exercise regime. I train usually 3 to 4 days per week in the gym, but every morning and every night I make certain that I walk. I do my 10 to 15,000 steps every day, and I have never felt fitter or healthier. Even when I look back and I was running a marathon, you know, the effort that went into that, I wished back then that I'd been smart enough to manage my diet better when I was doing that work. But I started to build this foundation. So I looked at what I was eating. I looked at movement, built movement in. But I also focused on sleep. And I can tell you, this is the secret sauce. When I was Premier, I used to get by on about 6 hours a night. You know, most nights I'd go to bed after lying in bed, looking at my phone, and I know if I ask for a show of hands, I'm sure most of you do it, and you flick through your socials and look at whatever bullshit's rolling through. And then I'd try to go to sleep. And I get my 6 scratchy hours. Now I actually focus on sleep, and I would highly recommend it as one of the key things that you think about if you want to improve your life. I have a reminder goes off now at 9:30, get ready for bed. You know, it was a bit of a joke first when my wife said, yeah, what are you doing? That's crazy. You're 58 years of age and you've got a reminder on your phone. Yes, but we started to work on it. My reminder goes off, and yes, now the household starts getting ready for bed. And I start to wind down. I turn off my socials. I don't look at what's coming through the feed. I love to read something, though, before I go to sleep. If anybody been reading any, what's his name, Lee Child's, Jack Reacher? Anybody read that? Yeah, a few. I've jumped into The Grey Man, who's just as good but a little bit nastier than Jack Reacher. It seems to settle me for some reason. And I find that if I read a couple of pages of that, set myself up for a night's sleep, on more nights than not, I'm now getting my 7.5 hours every night, and it has changed my life. It has changed my life. I am more functional. I have more capacity, and I'd highly recommend it. The other thing, in terms of your socials, and what comes through on these things. When I get up of a morning now, go back 3 years ago, the first thing that I would do lying in bed would be to turn on and flick to the Mercury website to see what people were saying about me, see what had changed. I'd go to the Australian newspaper to see what was happening at a national level. I'd open up my social feeds and see what's rolled through overnight, do a little bit of scrolling. Now my phone stays down. I get up of a morning, I go for a walk. I say my affirmations. I get back to the house, I have a light breakfast. I will read something positive. And I cannot highly recommend this. Read something positive before you pick up your phone. I like to pick up old books. I'm reading one at the moment by Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's an oldie, but it's a beauty, and it's the message, the underlying message in that book is about being more interested in other people than what you are in yourself. And so I read a couple of pages of that, and then I'll open up my news feeds. Changed my life dramatically. So build yourself a platform. Set a foundation. Eat, move, sleep. The three big levers. Just take the time to step back, reflect, and think about how those three big levers are working for you. Now, leave you with some takeaway messages regarding wellbeing. The most important thing that you can do, and believe me, I've learnt this the hard way. I disassociated from my family over a period of time. My professional life became more important. As the responsibilities grew in that particular area over time, the amount of time and presence that I spent with my family decreased proportionately. Manage yourself first. Do an audit of where you're at. Think about the amount of time that you're spending professionally, where your focus is. Think about those other aspects of your life and think about whether or not you're getting balance, and then start to manage yourself. And by manage yourself, it's not difficult. The most important thing that you need to do is just mark some me time in your diary. There are 168 hours in every week. I focus on getting 7 of those hours. About 4% of that time is me time. And that's me at the gym, or me out walking, or me reading something positive. But it's about me and my well-being and managing myself. Look after yourself by 2. By that I mean both physically and mentally. Take the time to make certain that you've got that balance built into your life. It's important. Look after others. Show gratitude. Be thankful. Now, it's amazing how good you feel, and if you think about this at Christmas time, if you give someone a present or you do something nice for someone, just how good that makes you feel. Try to get a touch of that every single day, whether it's a smile at somebody, whether it's thanking somebody, whether it's acknowledging that somebody has done a good job. It can change their life and it will improve yours. Take action. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. The most important thing that you can do, and this is in any aspect of your life, is to take steps to move forward. Don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And the last thing that I want to leave you with is understand you. Take the time to think through what drives you, what motivates you, what has made you. I want to share with you a letter that I wrote to a young Peter Gutwein. I was urged to do this by the ABC, who for years I thought were trying to kill me. And I think they were. And they almost did. But they asked me to write a letter to my younger self. And it's one of the most cathartic things that I've ever done. It actually gave me a chance, as I was working through the process of my own well-being, to think about what was driving me, to think about the things that I had learnt, to think about the things that I might have done a little differently. And I'll share that letter with you to finish this morning. And I'd highly recommend, if you haven't done this, that you do it, because it is amazing the thought processes that you go through, the emotions that you go through, but importantly, the understanding that you achieve as a result of doing this. And so this is a letter to a dear younger Peter. I was writing this, and in my mind, this was to the 7 or 8-year-old kid that was having the challenges. Dear Peter, don't worry about the bullying because your parents are migrants. This island is a better place than where you come from, and there will be the opportunity for a better life. Don't feel embarrassed that you have a speech impediment. An operation will fix it. You'll train yourself to speak in any forum, and one day you will be heard by many. Don't be ashamed that your football boots are second-hand, as are the clothes you wear to school, as this will teach you to value what you do by new and to appreciate those things. Treat with kindness the dogs, goats and cats you have to look after, as you can tell the character of a person by the way they look after their animals. Enjoy your time with your parents, brothers and sisters. Not all of them will outlive you. Always treat others as you would want to be treated, and know that everyone, regardless of their station, deserves the opportunity to be heard. Dream big dreams, but know for those dreams to be realised, you must commit to them as goals and determine that you will not fail. Understand that giving to others will improve the quality and richness of your own life. Show gratitude when others give to you, especially if it's the gift of their time. They can't ever get that back. Don't fear hard work, for the harder you work, the luckier you will become. And finally, never shirk responsibility. Be fearless in the pursuit of what you believe is right. View any failure as a learning experience. And importantly, wear sunscreen, preferably SPF 50. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this morning. I hope you have a fantastic conference.
Thank you very much, Peter. I know you'll agree. Very uplifting and some wonderful key takeaways about training your thoughts to transform your life, eating, sleeping, moving. Come a long way, hasn't he, from that little boy with the triangle down the back on stage to where he is today. That was very uplifting. Thank you very much, Peter. But we do have a few minutes if you're happy to take any questions for a couple of minutes, if anyone would like to ask one.
Yeah, as long as they're easy.
Yeah. Would anyone like to take a moment to ask Peter a question? Yes.
I think it is absolutely important. To be frank, as I went through my life, I wish that I'd had the opportunity to hear the stories of others earlier. I really do. Because everybody has challenges, everybody has difficulties, and all of us can learn something from that. It can either validate, it can support. Importantly, it sends a message that we're not alone. And so I think it's really important. And I'd encourage more people that have a platform like I do to talk about their journey more often.
Anybody else? Yep.
G'day. Once again, thank you for a fantastic speech. Do you believe that looking back at where you've come from, specifically through those stressful times as Premier, that knowing what you know now, you could have made change in that environment for yourself?
Absolutely. Look, one of the things that I should have done is reflected much earlier. I wish that the platform that I built in the last 3 years was something that I had done in my 40s. And I say to anybody that will listen, and a lot of my friends and colleagues are younger, is to take the time at whatever age, but preferably at as young as you possibly can be, to think about the platform, to think about getting the balance in your life, because you will be better for it. I know I would have been a better leader had I have given or taken some of the actions I've taken in the last 3 years if I'd done that a decade ago.
All right, thank you. Two great questions. The Honourable Peter Gutwein. Oh, sorry, remiss of me. Quite see. Thank you.
Look, it's a really interesting question. And we've seen that scrutiny in the political scene, both domestically, nationally and internationally, more at a much higher level. It's something that I think as a globe that we are going to have to address, because there will be less people that are prepared to put themselves forward for that level of scrutiny. It'd be fair to say, I think I can say this with a smile on my face, I lived like a monk when I was in public life, because I was so concerned about the fact that no matter what I did, if I went and had a beer, I used to smoke 20 years ago, if I had a cigarette, someone would take a photograph of it. And now today you go to any restaurant and it is filled with cameras and recording devices. And so it is challenging. I think hopefully at some stage as a society that we can have a mature conversation about how we deal with that inspection of people's lives to ensure that people do have the confidence and the courage to put themselves forward. Because otherwise we'll end up with some very, very bland individuals. You know, you look back and say at one of our best Prime Ministers, Bob Hawke, would he have survived in today's environment? Probably not. And the country would be the poorer for it. Nothing on football?
Gee, got it easy, hey? Anyone else, just while we have Peter here with us? We might just grab a mic, pass the microphone to you. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Peter. I would just like you to take a moment to reflect on the changes you've made and the impacts it's had on the wellness of your family and their relationships. When
I stood down, I had a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and they were good kids, but I had no relationship with them. And to actually have the opportunity to be able to engage, to discuss, for them to see that I'm much more than somebody that they see arguing on television or read an article online about, has been breathtakingly good for our family. In terms of my wife, it'd be fair to say that she supported me 110% in terms of the pursuit of my goals at a political level. But what was interesting, and I'll just share this with you because it happened in a linear fashion. When I first became a politician, we thought that I'd be away 15 weeks of the year in Hobart because I'm based out of the north. Then I became a shadow minister and it became 22 weeks of the year. Then I became a treasurer and held multiple ministries and it became 35 weeks of the year that I was away. Then I became Premier and I was away 50 weeks of the year. And what happened, and it'll happen to all of you here, as your professional life changes, as you take on more responsibilities, more accountability, that starts to fill the space that was filled by family or by conversations with loved ones. And you've got to be so mindful that that accretion isn't negative. In my case, it was very linear. We can look back and plot that as it occurred because it was basically time-bound, the amount of time away. But being able to step back, re-engage with family, have those discussions and conversations, and at the same time, with me focusing on wellbeing, it's actually something that's filtered right through the entire family unit. It has been fantastic. I'd highly recommend it to anybody to take the opportunity to do some self-reflection and to consider getting the balance that you have in your life, whether it's the right balance or whether you're in an imbalance as I was.
Okay, we've got time for one more. If anyone else would like to ask a final question. Yeah, we might just grab a microphone as well, just down the second row. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just being a public figure and a politician, you're open to all the scrutiny in the media. Did you notice the impact on your kids? And what did you do around that?
It's interesting. I was fortunate, and when I say I was fortunate, my family was reasonably fortunate. And I don't want to sound too bullshitty here. I was reasonably popular, and so the kids actually had more of a positive experience as a result. Even though Dad wasn't there, people were broadly supportive. On divisive issues, and we've had premiers and prime ministers where the population has been absolutely split. That must be really difficult, but fortunately I didn't have to manage through that because most of the stuff that my kids were being fed with was reasonably positive. But I do know, and we've lost premiers in the past, because that public scrutiny was such that their family could not escape the negativity that was feeding through so many different platforms.
All right, thank you for the questions. Peter Gutwein, really appreciate you being a part of the WorkSafe Tasmania conference for 2025. Would you please thank the Honourable Peter Gutwein?